What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Templar Healer. So Templar Healer, still widely regarded as one of the strongest healing classes in the game. So you're going to see this used quite a lot in vet trials and kind of PvE content here, mainly for the additional the stronger burst heals that the Templar has compared to the other classes when it comes to healing. As well as additional synergies that can only be provided by the Templar, so that just helps outcost uptimes from the tank. So you'll see a lot of Templar healers when it comes to just the end game content that you might see on YouTube or on Twitch. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over our gear, our skills, our attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build. Instead of a parse at the end of the video, instead we'll be discussing whenever we go over gear and the skills, kind of when you would use each skill, when you know what sort of situations best fit certain setups and things like that. And I'll also talk about my personal philosophy when it comes to healing towards the end, kind of how I approach healing. I don't really heal all that often just because the guilds that I'm in, we have very strong and consistent healers. But there are some instances where I will heal from time to time, to kind of fill in the gaps here and there. So I'll kind of show you guys, or not really show, but kind of explain my approach when it comes to healing vet trials. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started first with our gear. So this is just one of many different setups that I have for a healer. So one of the things you're going to realize when you are running a support role, whether that's a tank or a healer, is that you need to have a lot of flexibility when it comes to what set you're going to be wearing, and you're also going to need to have a kind of an open mind as to what sets fit which scenarios. So for healers particularly, because you normally have two healers in a trial, you're going to have to coordinate with the other healer and try to figure out which set fits best for which healer and what job they're doing. So in terms of monster helms, you really have three options, primary options when it comes to monster helms. Bogdan the Night Flames is just one of the stronger options out of those three. That's basically just provide you some additional max Magicka, as well as give a nice heal over time. Now that 5% chance to summon a totem does have a chance with every single heal, so healing springs hit 6 people, so you'll have a chance for it to proc on each of those 6 people, rather than just a 5% overall chance whenever you cast the healing springs. So it's very important, if you are going to be running Night Flame, to kind of have as many heal over time abilities as you can, just for the additional chances to get that Bogdan proc. Bogdan actually has a pretty substantial uptime despite that 5% proc chance, as long as you're able to maintain all your heal over time abilities. Now some other monster helm sets, the other two that you will primarily be seeing. First one's going to be Earthgore. So Earthgore comes from Bloodroot Forge, so you will need to have access to the Horns of the Reach DLC in order to have Earthgore. This is more of a burst heal. It's going to occur every 35 seconds. So that's kind of the downside of using Earthgore. It's quite a long cooldown between procs, but when it does proc, it's a very nice burst heal. And that basically allows a DPS and tank to be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to their jobs, which is always nice to have. And in addition, there are a couple of trials where this burst heal, even though it only happens every 3 to 5 seconds, does come very handy. It also doesn't have a target cap from what I have seen, so you can, in theory, heal all of your allies with that burst heal if they're in the Earthgore proc. The second helm that you're going to see used less so in the mini trials, more often in the normal, full-length trials, because the addition of stamina in those trials is going to be Sentinel of Rkugamz. So whenever you heal a friendly target, basically it summons a spider, which heals a little bit of health and restores some stamina to everybody within 5 meters. So this is pretty nice if you have a lot of stamina DPS in groups. So like I said, the Craglorn trials, Hoff, Maw, this is where you're going to see Sentinel of Rkugamz used more often, just because you tend to bring stamina into those trials. The heal is not very strong compared to something like Bogdan, but that stamina restore is actually quite nice to have. There is kind of the downside where the 8-second timer actually starts from right when the spider spawns, and when the spider spawns, it doesn't immediately start to use its effect, so really you have maybe 5 or 6 seconds of uptime compared to the advertised 8 seconds, and there is a cooldown there, so you're not going to have 100% uptime on it. It's going to be closer to 50% to 40%, but that stamina return is pretty nice to have, and I believe it is competitive with the Master's Resto staff when it comes to how much stamina that it's able to return for basically no cost at all. So those are your three primary monster helms that you're going to be running. You can overlap, obviously, so 2 healers can run Bogdan, 2 healers can run Earthgore, but generally speaking, it's nice to have one in each, so, you know, 1 Earthgore, 1 Bogdan. It's kind of up to you. You can play around with your specific group. Now, healers will be running 2 5-piece sets, or a 1 5-piece set, 1 back bar set, and a special Resto staff. So the builds that I have here right now does not use one of these special Resto staves. So the special Resto staves are going to be the Master and the Asylum staves. Let me just pull them out. So the Master's Resto staff heals whenever you use Grand Healing, so that's going to be Healing Springs. You restore 258 stamina to everybody who's affected, so it's just a little bit of additional stamina return. And then the Asylum Resto is kind of a little bit different. So instead of returning resources, it actually just helps out your sustain whenever you cast Blessing of Protection. So in this case, this would be Combat Prayer. The cost of your healing abilities are reduced by 30% for 3 seconds. That just helps out your sustain a little bit there. So those are the 2 primary kind of arena weapons, the special Resto stave that you might be using. And if you're running that, then your second 5-piece set will only be active on the front bar. And as a result, that does sort of limit you to what sets you're able to run on that back bar. But this particular setup does have the same set on both bars, so this is a 2 5-piece set. We're not using Asylum or we're not using Masters. So the first set that you're going to want to have in your group is going to be Olorime. This comes from Cloudrest, so you will need to have the Somerset expansion in order to get this set. Now I have the perfect version here, but you can go with the imperfect version if you would like. The difference between it is that 5-piece max Magicka bonus there. The imperfect version doesn't have it, and you will need to have all 5 pieces be imperfect. You can't mix and match between these 2 sets here. Olorime basically is the source of Major Courage, which is a very powerful buff to have in your group. Now, the thing with Olorime is because this buff can hit everybody in the group, you only need 1 healer to run Olorime. There's basically only one situation where you would not be running Olorime, and that would be in Hellra Citadel when you split up for the top boss and the bottom boss. Otherwise, Olorime is going to be vastly superior to Spell Power Cure. But you can pick up Spell Power Cure if you would like from White Gold Tower, so you will need the Imperial City DLC in order to do White Gold Tower. But Olorime basically outshines Spell Power Cure in pretty much every single respect. So you don't really see Spell Power Cure used too much anymore, except for maybe 4-man content and that one scenario in Hellra where the group splits into 2 for a substantial portion of the trial. The other set we're running is going to be Infallible Aether. This is a Craglorn set, so you can get it from any of the 3 Craglorn trials. So this might seem like a DPS set at first because of that Minor Slayer on the 3-piece, but it is more of a support set because of the 5-piece effect whenever you deal damage with a heavy attack. It says fully charged, but does not have to be fully charged. It's afflicted. Any enemy you damage is afflicted with minor vulnerability, which increases the damage taken by 8%. So it's a pretty strong debuff to have. This does overlap with Concussed in that they both apply the exact same debuff, minor vulnerability. So that's just something that you're going to want to keep in mind there. It's not necessarily going to be bad if you end up doing something like that. Basically have a lot of shock enchants and you have IA in group. It's actually preferable to have that because Concussed does help proc off balance, which does help out sustain a little bit, especially for Magicka DPS when they heavy attack. But like I said, you don't have to run IA if you don't need to, but it does really help out with that minor vulnerability uptime, particularly because a lot of Magicka DPS are swapping over to using an Absorb Magicka back bar to help out with sustain. So that's just something that you're going to want to basically figure out within your own group. Alright, and now in terms of our weapons and jewelry traits, armor traits, things like that, you do have a couple of options here. So Like I said, this is only one option that I have here. So I have Infused on one of my large pieces with Prismatic enchants, and then I have Divines with Max Magicka enchants on my small pieces. Some healers like to go all Prismatic enchants, and that's kind of up to you if you want to do that. If you go with all Prismatic, you will lose out on a little bit of Magicka, but you will gain health and stamina as a result. So you will have a little bit more health and stamina than I have here, about 400 or so, 400 or 500 or so. So that's nice to have, but then you are going to lose out on some max magicka, so your healing will be a little bit weaker overall. So that's one option there. In terms of jewelry, I like to go with all infused, but it's kind of up to you how you want to deal with that. If you want more magicka, you can go with arcane if you would like. If you would like to have some more health and stamina, you can go with triune if you'd like. I personally just prefer infused for the stronger enchants. And then for your jewelry enchant, you have a couple of options here. So the two primary ones that you're going to be picking between are going to be Magicka regen and spell damage. Spell damage for the additional healing strength, and then Magicka regen obviously for that regen boost. There is a third option there, and this is going to be a reduced Magicka cost. However, Magicka regen is generally going to be stronger than Magicka cost in pretty much 95% of all scenarios, so there's really no reason to really run cost reduction too much. The Magicka regen is going to be, typically speaking, going to be stronger overall, especially when you have the infused enchant here. So in generally speaking, just kind of touch upon this, the regen versus spell damage kind of thing, why I have 1 spell damage, 2 Magicka regen. This is before buffs, so I like to get as close as I can to 2k with both spell damage and Magicka regen. Obviously this is not always going to work out, so you can see here that I have 1742 spell damage compared to 2185 Magicka regen. Just try your best to get up to that point. That's just kind of the benchmark that I try to make here, but you know, you can adjust it as needed. It's very easy to overheal in Elder Scrolls ESO, so don't feel like you have to stack a crap ton into spell damage or anything. There are other ways to kind of make up the amount of healing that you're doing if you do have a little bit lower spell damage. Now, in terms of weapons, obviously you want to have a Resto staff, and I have this on my front bar typically, and then back bar is going to be my lightning staff. Now, in terms of traits and enchants, I personally like infused or powered on my Resto staff. Powered for obviously the stronger heals, and then infused for the additional power to my enchant here. So I do have weakening and weapon damage enchants, and I'll talk about enchants in just a moment here. There are some other potential options you can choose from though. You can go with precise if you want more critical heals. You can go with nirn to affect all of your damage, all of your heals and damage if you want to go with that. You can go with decisive if you want a little bit more ulti gain, but generally speaking, most healers will stick to something like infused or powered for the additional heal or the additional enchant strength. You have the same deal here with the back bar as well. Infused and powered are going to be the most common one that you see. Infused is going to be a little bit stronger for lightning staff just because most of your heals are obviously going to be from your Resto staff bar, so powered back bar doesn't really make much sense here. So typically you'll see infused on the back bar. But you do have, again, all the other options there. You have nirn, precise, decisive, you can defending if you want a little bit more resistances, things like that. So do have a couple of options here, and then I do have a weapon damage enchant here to help boost up my spell damage for some stronger heals. Other potential enchant options you can choose from, besides the weapon damage and weakening, are going to be the shock damage enchant to help with concussed uptime. It's going to be very nice to have if you don't have Infallible Aether in group, just to help out with that concussed uptime to get some more mana vulnerability uptime. Another option is going to be Absorb Magicka. If you have sustain issues, then you can run an Absorb Magicka enchant to kind of help your sustain a little bit. And then one final enchant that you're probably not going to be using all too often, that's going to be your Crusher enchant. And that's mainly because the tanks are typically going to be running Crusher, especially with Torug's Pact now becoming a little bit stronger now. Or rather coming back into style now. You're typically going to have your tanks running Crusher, but there might be some instances where the tanks will not be running Crusher, in which case it might be beneficial for you to run Crusher instead. And a final enchant that a lot of people are overlooking, I feel like, for support roles is going to be the Hardening enchant, which gives you a little bit of a damage shield every time it procs. Just helps out your survivability. It's a free damage shield, so if you are having issues with surviving, then you might want to consider running a Hardening enchant on one of your bars. Now let's go ahead and talk about some other replacement sets here. So I'm going to break it down into what I like to call body sets and then backbar sets. So body sets are sets that you must have on your body. Basically, they need to be active at all times. So you can only wear jewelry and body pieces. If you want to run it as a weapon, then you will need to have both weapons there. And then your backbar sets are sets that you can run with the Masters or Asylum Restoration Staff if you decide to use those, because the effects can be basically procced on one bar. So starting off first here, let's see if I can find all of these. I have a lot of different sets here. First one's going to be Mending. It's called the Healing Mage set, but all the pieces that you will get are going to be called the Mending, as you can see here. And the 5-piece, when you use an AoE heal ability, you reduce weapon damage of all enemies within 10 meters of you by X amount for 3 seconds. So this is more for progression style guilds to kind of help reduce the damage that's incoming. The downside of running Mending is you have to be basically within melee range, and it's a pretty short duration. The good news is most of your heals are area of effect healing abilities, so a lot of your heals will proc Mending, but that 10-meter radius is kind of a downer, so you will basically have to be within melee range of whatever it is that you want this debuff to be applied to. So it's kind of fallen out of style for, you know, score running guilds, but for progression style guilds, it's a pretty nice set to have here. Talked about Infallible Mage already. Jorvuld's Guidance is another set here, so this comes from Scalecaller Peak. And this basically increases the duration of all your major minor buffs and your damage shows that you apply to yourself or allies by 40%. So this is very nice to pair with something like Olorime, which gives major courage. And it also is pretty nice for Templars. Basically boosts your minor munding duration and things like that. So it's nice to have here, but generally speaking, it's going to be better suited for a Warden, because Wardens generally push out more buffs, more major minor buffs than Templars do. So it's going to be a little bit more useful on a Warden compared to a Templar, but it's still a set that you're going to want to pick up and hold on to just in case your Warden healer or your second healer doesn't have Jorvuld's. The big bonus with Jorvuld's is it does affect the major force from Warhorn, so that's the main reason why Jorvuld's is so strong. Other sets here, not going to be running Master Architect. Talked about Olorime. Sanctuary, this is another set here. So this increases the healing received by 12% for basically your entire group, as long as they're within 10 meters of you. So basically just boost your healing strength. Again, very similar to Mending in that the major downside is that 10-meter radius. So you have to be within melee range of the group rather than the boss. So for stacked fights, this is very useful to have. For example, if you're progressing Cloudrust hard mode. But for a lot of other fights where you're going to be spread out, Sanctuary does lose a good amount of power just because you aren't able to get that healing received buff to everybody in that group. And I believe Worm is the last set we're going to be talking about here. So this reduces the cost of your Magicka abilities by 4% for everybody within 28 meters of you. So that's really nice to have. It just helps out Magicka sustain. Now, in terms of which sets are body sets and which sets are backbar sets, so Healing Mage is definitely a body set just because of the duration. It's a 3-second duration here. Jorvuld's Guidance, depending on, you know, what your skills are on your back bar, this could be considered a back bar set. If you just have Warhorn on one bar, for instance, as long as you use Warhorn on your Jorvuld's Guidance bar, that's really the main thing. They're getting that additional minor force uptime. So while some people call this a body set, I would consider it a back bar set. You can use it as a back bar set, I should say. Where's the other sets here? Olorime, we already talked about. It can be a body set or a back bar set, actually. So if you have it on your back bar, you can proc it on the back bar because the circle does last for 10 seconds. So this is a proc set, so you can use this as a back bar set if you would like. Sanctuary is, as you can imagine, a body set only because of the effect only obviously works if you have all 5 pieces active. And it's the same thing with Worm. Worm is a body set only because of that 5-piece being a static effect. So those are your main sets there, and kind of whether they're body or back bar sets. And obviously your Masters and Asylum staves should be used with a back bar set on the back bar rather than a body set. Now let's go over the character sheet here. So I am a Breton. Bretons are regarded as one of the stronger races when it comes to healing. Many people regard Argonians as the strongest race, mainly because they have 5% additional healing done, which is unique to the Argonians themselves, as well as the additional health and Magicka. They get 9% max health, 3% max Magicka, so it just helps out the survivability a little bit. But the major bonus of Argonians is whenever you drink a potion, you basically get a little bit of resources, Magicka, health, and stamina, so it just helps out your sustain by a pretty decent margin. So basically every potion is a mini tri-potion. Bretons, however, are also very strong healers as well, mainly because of that cost reduction. So they have 3% cost reduction to all Magicka abilities, so that's really nice to have for sustain. You get 10% max Magicka and 3960 additional spell resistance, so they are pretty survivable as well. Any of the other magically inclined races, so high elves, dark elves, those guys are also not bad choices for healers, but generally speaking, Argonians and Bretons are going to be the two most common and strongest races when it comes to healing. Now for our attributes, I have 64 points into Magicka, which gives me 17.5k max health right now with my food and my prismatic enchants. You can shift a couple of points into health if you would like. Some healers like to be sitting at 18k health, in which case you can shift 4 into health and have 60 Magicka for health. So that's kind of up to you whether you want to do that or not. 17k is usually plenty of health for most content in the game, so I wouldn't necessarily move points around if you don't feel like you need the additional survivability. For our Munda Stone, we are going with the ritual. This just helps out our healing done. So this particular setup here with Infallible, Aether, and Olorime, we do have a little bit lower spell damage than I would like, so I'm making up for that using the ritual instead. And then for our food, we're running Clockwork Citrus Fillet, so this gives us health, Magicka, health regen, and Magicka regen. So I like this just because of that additional health and Magicka, max health, max Magicka. Two other foods that you might want to consider running. The first one's going to be Witch Brothers Potent Brew. It's basically a weaker version of Clockwork Citrus Fillet, but it's a lot cheaper to make. Then the second option is going to be Orzgar's Red Frothgar. That gives you 5,000 max health and about 450 Magicka regen instead. So you are giving up some max Magicka if you decide to run Frothgar instead, but you have a little bit stronger regen and you have more max health to work with. So those are the three primary food options that you can run on a healer. Now for our skills. So a lot like our gear, you kind of have to be flexible with skills. There are some skills that you're going to want to swap out, and you do have a few flex spots here that I'll cover in a second. So on our front bar, this is our Resto bar. I have Ritual of Rebirth. This is a flex spot, arguably. Then you have Healing Springs, Combat Prayer, Energy Orb, Extended Ritual. These slots I would not call flex. You want all these abilities here on your bar somewhere. You can kind of move these two abilities around because they're not Resto Staff abilities, but you definitely want to have these on one of your bars. And then Solar Prison as our ultimate here for the major main. Then for our back bar, we have Luminous Shards, Blockade of Storms, Channel Focus, Overflowing Altar, Elemental Drain. So these four abilities, Ele Drain, Channel Focus, Blockade, and Shards, those are also non-negotiable. These are pretty much spots that you always want to have up. You might consider dropping something like Elemental Drain if your other healer is going to be primarily responsible for applying it. So this is technically a flex spot as well, but it's going to be dependent on whether you are doing the drain or your other healer is doing the drain. Overflowing Altar, this one is going to be more of a flex spot here. So this is Overflowing Altar is a very nice ability to have. It applies minor lifesteal and it gives a very nice synergy. But only one healer, or one support wall I should say, needs to run this. It's typically going to be a Warden healer or Warden tank for the minor toughness that it provides as well to the minor lifesteal. So as a Templar, you probably will not be running Overflowing Altar all too much. Then our ultimate's going to be Aggressive Warhorn. Pretty nice. It's probably the strongest support ultimate you can have. Now let's talk about flex options here. So I did mention that Ritual Rebirth is a flex spot on the front bar here. So you do have a few options here when it comes to what you want to run. If you're running 4-man content, you can run Breath of Life instead of Ritual of Rebirth. Breath of Life is basically can you think of it as a single target version of Ritual Rebirth where it's a burst heal. That's going to be a little bit cheaper, but Ritual Rebirth is going to be a little bit better for trials just because it's an AoE heal, and obviously because it heals more, it also has a higher cost. So you can run Breath of Life instead of Ritual Rebirth for trials and 4-man content, but more for 4-man content than trials. In terms of other abilities you might want to consider running, I have Force Pulse here, but this should be Crushing Shock. If you need an range interrupt, you might want to slot Crushing Shock here on the back bar. Mutagen is another build that you might want to consider running for 4-man content in Trials, because it only affects 2 people at a time every time you cast it, so you have to cast it obviously a lot more times in a trial to hit everybody compared to in a dungeon, but it's a really nice heal over time to have. I prefer Mutagen over Rapid Regen, the other morph, but you can go with either morph really. It's up to you. It's personal preference at this point. A shield if you really need it, Dampen Magic or Harness Magicka, pick whichever one you would like. Where's the last one? So the last ability is going to be Bone Surge, not Spiked Bone Shield. It has to be Bone Surge, and that's going to be for the major vitality bonus that you get from the synergy. So that's really nice to have. You're not necessarily going to be running it a whole lot, just because it does use stamina and it's fairly expensive to run. But it is something that you're definitely going to want to learn in case you have to run it. I see it more often in instances where you want the additional healing strength from the major vitality. So that'd be places like Cloud Rest or Asylum. In Alliance War, one skill that you pretty much need to get is going to be Efficient Purge, because it just is a cleanse, a group cleanse that's a lot more reliable than the Purify synergy from Extended Ritual. So obviously it's going to be situational. It depends on whether the fight has debuffs or not, but you're going to want to run it in those fights that do have debuffs that are going out there. One more ability that I forgot to mention here is going to be Power of the Light. If you have a Templar in your group, you will not be running this. But if you don't have a Templar in your raid group, then Power of the Light is actually a pretty nice ability to have for that Minor Fracture and Minor Breach. This is more for min-maxing guilds. It's not that big of a bonus to your DPS overall, so you don't feel like you have to run it if you don't have a Templar, but it is something that you do want to consider picking up in case you do have to run it. Alright, so let's go over our champion points. So CP cap is now 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of the 3 different constellations. So starting with our green CPs, I have 75 into Arcanist and 75 into Tenacity here, which gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes. So I personally, right now have a balanced approach, so 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, 40 Warlord, but you can kind of put your points really wherever you would like. It's kind of up to you where you want to put them. For our blue CPs, this is assuming that you're basically, this character is only for healing. You're not really doing any sort of like DPSing on the side. This is not a main character where you're swapping back and forth between DPSing and healing. 100 Blessed, 100 Elfborn, which gives us 70 remaining points. And then I have 19 LE Expert, 20 Spell Erosion, and then 31 Thaumaturge. A lot of the blue CPs here are more centered around DPS. So it's kind of up to you where you want to put those remaining 70 points there for DPS. Finally, for our red CPs, I actually think I need to I do change these around a little bit here, so bear with me while I play around with these a little bit. There we go. So this is a balanced approach. This is kind of centered around basically having good mitigation across and no matter what piece of content that you're running, but you might want to change your CP points around a little bit to maximize the mitigation you're getting in a specific content that you're running. So for a balanced approach, I have 81 into Ironclad, 61 into Thick-Skinned, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. You could put points into Quick Recovery to get the Field Physician passive, but as a healer, you will not be rezzing. Healers do not res in ESO, so I would not put any points here for the Field Physician passive, unlike what I would recommend for like a tank or a DPS. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the build itself. So let's discuss a little bit behind a little bit of how you should approach healing. So in Elder Scrolls Online, the healing role is seen less as a how much damage can you heal in a given amount of time. It's more about buffs. How well can you maintain your buffs for the group? How well can you maintain debuffs on the boss? So that's the measure that a lot of endgame PvE guilds use when they kind of assess their healers. What are your uptimes on Minor Berserk from Combat Prayer? What are your uptimes on off bounce? What are your uptimes on Weakening Enchant or Crusher Enchant? That's more what's what healing is about in ESO. It's more about the support that you can provide, less so about the healing per second that you're doing. So for me personally, I tend to prioritize having those buffs up, which includes things like Orbs, the resource return, Comet Prayer for the minor berserk, obviously Ellie Drain and Shards for the tank for synergies and things like that. So it's a very difficult thing to object. There are obviously some objective measures, but a lot of it's going to be more based upon, feel, so to speak. That doesn't mean that objective measures are necessarily bad measures, but they're actually very useful to have to kind of identify your weaknesses when it comes to where you're applying buffs and things like that. But a lot of healing doesn't necessarily revolve around a rotation. Like, I don't have a rotation where it's like I need to do Comet Prayer and then two Orbs and then I do Shards or something. No, it's not like that. Support role is I kind of alluded to this in the beginning of the video, but you have to be flexible. You have to adapt to the situation at hand. If your DPS are saying we need more Orbs out, you push out some more Orbs and maybe give up a little bit of healing done through like healing springs or something. If your DPS are taking more damage than usual, you might need to give up Orbs a little bit, or let the Comet Prayer fall a little bit so you can get everybody all the way back up to full. So you kind of have to play around with your group, play around the situation, and adapt accordingly. But in terms of what I want to prioritize, this is pretty much going to be universal across all healers and PvE. The most important things you want to prioritize are going to be your Comet Prayer for the minor berserk buff to your DPS, and then Orbs and or Shards for the healing, not healing, but the synergies. In terms of raw healing itself, you can put down the healing springs, but normally speaking, if you just have an Orb out in the field at all time, Orbs are going to be one of your strongest heals in the game. So just take a look at the tooltip. Before any buffs right now, we're sitting at 934, but once we get things like minor mending, we have minor vitality maybe, or major vitality, major mending, we might have things like, we have our weapon damage enchant, we have major sorcery, minor sorcery, things like that, crit heals. This actually ends up being a little bit closer to 2,000 health restored every half a second. So healing Orbs is definitely one of your strongest heals in the game, right up there with healing springs because and Comet Prayer. So I like to just try to have at least one Orb on the field at all times. And then the other thing that you're going to want to try to maintain is going to be challenge focus. That's just for the additional resources that you're getting. And then Ellie Drain, if you're the one responsible for maintaining Ellie Drain, don't want that to drop at all. It just helps out your Magicka sustain by a very good margin. And then you just want to try to have Ritual down, just because Ritual is a very nice heal over time. It provides additional synergy to have, plus it also gives you your minor mending buff. So Ritual and Challenge Focus both give minor mending through the Sacred Ground passive here. So you do want to have at least one of these down, preferably both if you can, for the minor mending. And you can see here that this does boost up energy orbs to almost 1k health every half a second there. So those are kind of how I approach healing. I tend to approach it from I need to maximize my buff, I need to maximize my resource return to my group kind of thing. So I tend to prioritize doing Comet Prayer instead of healing springs, and Comet Prayer and Orbs are generally going to be my top healing abilities that I use as a healer whenever I heal. If you guys check out a couple of my past streams, I do have a few videos where I am healing, so you guys can get a sense of what my healing philosophy is and kind of how I approach healing if you watch those videos. So that's pretty much it for this build video. Let me know down in the comments section below if you guys have any questions or comments about this build. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.